Hello and welcome to that session where I would like to talk about the emerging trends that we see in business process management. And I think I can't talk about future trends without looking what happened in the last 15 months. And I think beyond all the human tragedies, so we've seen so many disruptions in nearly all industries. And you see here, we saw broken supply chains. We saw many organizations at risk losing the foundation of their business model. That's the one hand side. On the other side, a lot of positive things. We see that a lot of organizations had intensive discussions how to adapt their offerings, the product offerings and service offerings, to survive the crisis. And I would like to share with you two of these examples. First one, that's from the hotel industry. And of course, during the lockdown, it was nearly impossible to do traditional overnight staying. So we saw a lot of hotels coming up with a hybrid model. So that means a mixture of traditional hotel business and co-working spaces. So really nice and interesting trend. I'm sure that will survive the crisis. I'm sure about that. So second example, I think we all know that it was a big challenge for restaurants as well. So as a normal dining was not really possible. And the guy here on the right-hand side, so that's Christian Bau, a 3-star chef, very well-known 3-star chef from the region where I live. And of course, it was not possible for him to invite guests to his restaurant. And instead of that, so he invented the so-called, what you see here, Bau in the box. So it's a 4-course menu for taking home. And I read an interview with him, so a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I had to transform from a chef to a logistics manager. So inventing all these processes, so including selection of partners, including selection of distribution partners, so to make sure that all this food really reaches the customer in time and in perfect quality. So beyond these positive examples, we all hope, of course, that in a couple of months from now, so the corona crisis will be under control, hopefully. But we see disruptions even beyond the corona crisis. So when we look at the different industries, so a lot of disruptions that put a question mark behind the business model of many of these industries. And when we look at the retail on the left-hand side, so we all see the big trend to online shopping for sure. So the question is, what will happen with all these huge shopping malls? What would happen with the city centers? So big question marks. So automotive industry is the next one. So we see even beyond the electricity question that there will be new players in the market. And maybe in general, there will be a question mark, what will be the future concept of mobility? So I'm sure that the market in 5 years will look totally different as we know today. So a similar thing when we look at the energy sector. So a lot of new business model triggered by, I would say, a changing energy mix, so in power generation. And last but not least, so the financial sector. So we all see these innovations being triggered by blockchains, for example, being triggered by cryptocurrency, being triggered by so many new fintech companies. So it's obvious that the business model of banking will be changed and that a bank in 5 years from now will look totally different. So that means at the end of the day, we see that the business models in nearly all industries are really under attack. And for most of organizations, it's not really an option to say, oh, let's wait. So you have to identify what is your current situation and how to adapt your business model in the future. So really to be competitive in the future as well. So, and what do we mean with business model? So it's, of course, discussing the strategic question, are we doing the right things? So this is what we call business transformation, adapting this business model. And you see here the aspects on the left-hand side. So of course you have to discuss what about your markets, what about your goals and strategies. I think you have to define what about your product portfolio and the value proposition, how to reach your customers. What about the partner ecosystem? And at the end of the day, it's a question how to make money with your portfolio. Yeah? And I think it's a good idea, and this is what we learned, is that defining the business model should follow a structured approach. So it's not a good idea to do that with pencil and slide decks, as all these aspects have to be defined in a structured, reusable way. And there is more or less, I would say, an industry standard for designing business models. It's business model canvas. So of course it's available in the Aris platform as well. So, and I think it's really a good idea to use that methodology. And beyond that, we see that there is a really, really high amount of investments going into digital transformation initiatives. You see here the value of $2 billion by 2022. But, and there are some concerns, there are some analysis that show that 70% of these investments were wasted on failed programs. And when we look at the remaining 30%, we see that only 16 of them really produce improvements of the performance at the end of the day. So that's, would say it's really a horrible number. And the question is, of course, what is the reason for that? And one of the reasons is what you see here. So very often the strategic business model is not really well connected with business operations, with the operating model. So with the operating model, we mean everything that is needed really to make the end-to-end processes happen. So focus is here on operational excellence. The question is, are we doing the things right? So effectiveness and efficiency is here the question. Yeah. And I think many of you know this nice statement here, form follows function, from design schools like the Bauhaus, for example. And it's easy and really, really worth to transfer that to our business as well. And that would mean process follows strategy. So that sounds nice, isn't it? But the question is how to put that into practice. And again, when we look at the strategic aspects we just discussed, so it's the challenge to translate that into the relevant aspects of your operating model. So that means, for example, translating the value proposition of your organization into the suitable end-to-end processes. And it's a big, big difference whether positioning yourself as an innovation leader or as a cost leader, or focusing on service quality, for example, as your unique selling point. Yeah? So big, big difference how the business process will look at the end of the day. So in a similar way, you have to translate the customer segments and customer channels into customer journeys, and the description of the touch points between your organization and the customer. And in a similar way, of course, translate the partner ecosystem, meaning the relationship to your distributors and to your suppliers into the end-to-end process as well. So this is what we mean with process follows strategy. And the second issue that we see is that very often this operating model is not really well communicated to the workforce. So meaning at the end of the day that the employees don't really understand their role and their responsibility within that new way of working. And of course, that's a big problem. And when we look at an example, so looking at the retail industry, so there are organizations with thousands or 10,000 shops worldwide. And when you see the corona situations with new regulations coming up very often every second week, of course, it's a big, big challenge to make sure that the new regulations are communicated really well to each single shop and to each single branch. And it's obvious what will not work is to do that in a manual way. So to use here a manual organizational handbook, and then to ship that across the organization, and then hope that the employees will read and understand that. So that will not work. So vice versa, what we see, what a lot of our customers are doing, is that they use a digital organizational handbook. For example, for a retail organization, that could mean that you use here a graphical description of the shop system, as you see here on the left-hand side. And then you get additional information here via a mobile device. And if you are responsible for a specific department within the shop, for example, fresh food, then you click on the button and you get exactly the information that you need for doing your daily job. If you want to see what you have to know about emergency plans, click on the button and you get the information that you need. So I think that's the way to go. And of course, that's not only communication in one direction. So the headquarters is, of course, interesting in rolling out and distributing policies. But on the other side, they want to see what about the acceptance of this information. And that means an employee can say, yes, I've read the information. Here I press the button confirm, and then the headquarter can do monitoring, can do analysis. So what about the acceptance? How many of the employees have seen that? How many have confirmed that? So we support the full cycle of communicate, confirmation, and collaboration between employees as well. And I think that's the way to go. And I think that's really a cool approach. So, and when talking about work instructions and policies becoming digital, so we are close to the area of regulatory compliance. And regulatory compliance, I would say that's a really relevant topic. We will see that in a second, meaning that you have to know all these legal regulations that are relevant for you, for your organization. And this analysis here shows that there are more than 200 regulatory updates every day on average. Yeah? So that means you have to check, is a new regulatory update, is that relevant for me? Is that relevant for my industry? Is that relevant for my region? And if yes, then I have to make sure that that's being implemented in my organization. And what we've seen is, of course, when we look at the different frameworks as part of regulatory compliance, many of you have already established a quality management system, so based on ISO 9000, ISO 9001. But we see that's not the end of the story. As I said, regulatory compliance is evolving. So we see that business continuity management became a really hot topic during the crisis. So to manage emergency situations. So for a couple of years, so information security and data protection is really, really essential. So to be in the market. And another topic that we see at the horizon is environmental management as well. So, and how to put that into practice. And what we see is, and that's a good thing, there is a big overlap between these different topics. So that means most of these regulatory topics, they are related to, first of all, the process management of the organization. You have to understand what are the key processes. You have to understand what are the data that are handled and managed via these processes. You have to understand what about the organizational responsibility, what about the IT applications that are in place. So that means there is an overlap between the different topics. And that means in a second step, so it's a good idea not to implement all these topics as separated compliance systems, but to do that in an integrated way. So this is what we mean with integrated regulatory compliance, describing all these assets here on the left-hand side only once, and then putting the framework-specific requirements on top of that. Yeah, that's the idea. And furthermore, a lot of new topics are at the horizon. For example, in Germany, so the decision has been taken about the so-called Lieferkettengesetz or Supply Chain Act. So that will become active in 2 years from now. That means each organization has to monitor the whole supply chain and making sure that all the labor and human rights standards are effective and validated along the supply chain. Another big topic is what we see under the headline of sustainability and green BPM. So it's about energy efficiency, resource efficiency, sustainability. And of course, there is a strong relationship with business process as well. So therefore, very often the headline green BPM is being used. So and now we can see, or when you look at that picture, I think we remember that incident that happened in the Suez Canal. I think it was last week of March this year. And the Suez Canal was blocked here by that ship Evergreen. And estimations showed that the cost, the blockage cost, should be between $6 billion and $10 billion a week. Yeah, so that's a crazy number. And what we've seen as by that example is that the topic of business resilience becomes so important. Yeah? And what we mean by that is the ability to be prepared for these unexpected events. So to make sure that you can respond and recover quickly to ensure your customer service. And why is that important? Looking at that analysis here of McKinsey, so they say, this report says a company could easily lose a year's profit to such a supply chain disruption, a year's profit. Yeah? And beyond that, more than 50% of the executives say that they don't have a clear visibility into their supply chain beyond tier 1, so beyond level 1. Yeah? So vice versa. So a report of Forrester says, firms with a more mature resilience capabilities grew at a rate of 2.4 times higher than the industry standard. So it makes really sense that you put effort into that topic. So it's one example of regulatory compliance, but I think it's a really important one. The more we could ask ourselves, what are the best practices to implement risk and compliance management? And still rather often we see separation of the team's risk and compliance on the one hand side and the business operations on the other side. So, and you see there is a question mark, as of course that, let's say, puts risk and compliance management more or less as a big burden on each shoulder, without resulting in real business benefits, so leading to suboptimal controls at the end of the day. So much better idea is to think of risk and compliance in a really aligned way. So that means close integration, close alignment between the business owners and the risk and compliance managers, so that you get a full visibility of risks in both directions. So to make sure that all your controls are effective, and that you take the benefits of compliance management regards to quality and regards to customer satisfaction as well. I think that's a good idea. Furthermore, looking at the operational excellence, of course, at the end of the day, we want to optimize the situation. Yeah? And the question is, what is the way, how could we do that? And it's always a good idea to look a little bit left and right to other, would say, industries that are really experts in optimization. And I think one of them is a professional sports team. So for example, when you look at the Formula One race, so very often you see such a control tower where all relevant technical parameters are being monitored and validated. So at the end of the day, you use this analytical information for deriving the best pit stop strategy. So you have to know the position of your competitors, all these technical things, and then deriving a tactics out of that. And we use a similar approach for process management, and this is under the headline of process mining. And we could do that for nearly all processes that are relevant for you. So it could be contact to order, it could be order to cash or procurement to pay, it could be innovation process, idea to product, or even HR process like contact to hire. And what a system like Aris Process Mining provides you with is, on the one hand side, the relevant KPIs. For example, you see here in that example here, how many cases have been executed per day, what about the average throughput time, and so on. But, and I think that's really important, very often these metrics are only the tip of the iceberg. So that means we allow you, when there is a critical situation, to dive deeper. And diving deeper means that you get a visualization of the as-is processes. So that means by automated discovery, you see exactly what is the structure of the process really being executed. So you see here probabilities, and you see all the different variants that belong, for example, to that procurement to pay process. And that helps me to understand what is really the best practice. What is really the root cause for long cycle time? What is the root cause for issues regarding quality? Where are the bottlenecks within the process? And the system helps me to identify these issues and to derive measures for optimization. Yeah, that's the idea. And another interesting topic is that on the one hand side, very often the information for process mining are being extracted from classical IT systems, from your CRM system, from your ERP system, from your legacy system, whatever. But what we see is even more relevant and interesting when we combine these IT information with data coming from OT system, operational technology systems. So if you have machines or devices or sensors in place that produce a lot of raw data, so in the context of your production, in the context of your maintenance, and then you combine these things together, that's really, really a big benefit and a real innovative approach. And that's an example here regarding that. So an example where we monitor the production process, production of vaccines, so in the context of Corona. And you see some of these information are coming from IT, some are coming from machines and sensors. And we bring everything together, and you see here on the left-hand side the discovered as-is processes with all the loops and all the probabilities. So providing you a perfect basis. So for the analysis, for example, about what are the reasons for long delivery times? What are the reasons for delay in the production of vaccines? Did we interrupt the cool chain, for example? So that could be a relevant, important incident, and we want to avoid that for sure. So, and I think these are really cool scenarios, and maybe think about that if you think about scenarios for process mining in your organization. And the question is, where are we today with process mining, and what will be the next steps? What are the trends? And of course, with process mining, of course, as you've seen, you get information about the as-is execution of your processes. And it's a good idea to think that end to end. So that means having the ecosystem in mind. So meaning that you see also the parts of the process being executed by your suppliers or being executed by your distributors. So, and on top of that, so with process mining, very often we look at the internal processes, but we could use the same or similar functionalities and capabilities for mining and discovering the external customer journeys. So meaning all the touch points that a customer has with your organization. And you can put analytics on top of that as well. And then you can bring together these different aspects. And when we go on in that direction, I think many of you know the term task mining. It's very often used in the context of robotic process automation. So here we mean the detailing of processes. That means we want to know what are the flow of activities being executed by a simple or by a single employee. So that's been monitored by this task mining functionality. And we can combine that as well. So process mining as a high-level discovery and task mining for detailing. And the next step could be that we analyze as well, so the interaction patterns between teams or organizational units. So very often we have unstructured flows of activities as well. And of course, we want to see what happened there. So maybe that could also be a point to derive optimization measures. And last but not least, so I talked about OT data. And of course, we want to monitor and analyze the flow of materials as well. And this is what we call material mining. And of course, as I said, it makes sense to bring these different parts together. And that goes beyond the classical process mining as we know it today. And that's the reason why we call it enterprise mining. So I think this will be the next steps. So that meaning that we increase the scope of process mining to other aspects of the organization, of other dynamic aspects of the organization. And we bring that together in an integrated approach. That's the idea. Yeah? When we look at the overall picture of ARIS, of the ARIS platform, and I think many of you know that. So of course we provide you with capabilities so for strategy modeling, for customer journey mapping, for process design. And on the other side, for monitoring, controlling, and analytics of all these aspects. So that's typically what's being called an enterprise management system powered by ARIS. And we use the headline, transform, optimize, control. So meaning that we cover the full life cycle. So, and we will provide you with capabilities for the optimization of that full life cycle. That's the idea. And when discussing that with customers, very often we get the question, so what about agile? What about agile scenarios? Very often we see not everything can be described in formal structured processes. So we see organization using that VUCA acronym, meaning that there are so many volatile and uncertain scenarios, an organization have to take decisions based on incomplete information. So how to handle that? So how is that related to process management? And that leads us to the area of automation. So we want to make sure that all these business that are described here in the enterprise management system can put into ad hoc applications and into ad hoc processes as well. So that means when talking about automation, we really see that agility should be combined with process management. And you see the definition of Gartner, they call it business-driven hyper-automation, as very often it's a combination of different technologies. So on the one hand side, we see, say, the classical workflow processing, digital process automation, DPA. We see robotic process automation, so where software bots are being used. And we see, and that's really, really cool and relevant as well, is that more and more low-code, no-code application platforms are being established. And I would like to show you one example in that direction, as I think it's really a cool solution. And it's a framework that's being developed by one of our partners. It's the partner Imendos. And they developed a no-code engine based on ARIS. So that means you describe all the aspects of an application into an ARIS model. And then you can deploy that, you put that information into that no-code engine, and then you create apps more or less by clicking one button. And they did that for one customer, State of Luxembourg, and it's really, really a cool scenario. As that customer produced hundreds of apps based on ARIS models, And one interesting example here is in the context of Corona, where they had not the time to describe all these requirements for their IT organization in detail and then wait another 6 months until the application is done. So they did that in hours or days. So producing all the apps that they need for managing the vaccine distribution, for example, in the country. Yeah. So really, really interesting. So when I summarize the trends I talked about, you see them here on the right-hand side. I think we started with some strategic topics. We saw that business models are under attack. And of course, process management should be seen in a close relationship to strategic decisions. So secondly, we talked about the area of regulatory compliance. We saw that digital work instructions and policies are becoming digital. And business resilience is really an important topic. And we've seen the direction of process mining into the world of enterprise mining with the aspect of bridging IT and OT together. And I discussed and said some words about the agility in conjunction with processes. So the question is now, what does it mean for you? So I think it's very essential for you that when you say how to establish all the things in my organization, that you rethink again, what are your objectives? And typically, you see here 3 categories on the right-hand side. You have the objective of strategic transformation or operational excellence or regulatory compliance, or a combination of all of them. And what you can do is you can define the roadmap and the capabilities that you need to reach that goal. And for example, we see a lot of customers with operational excellence in mind, starting with process mining. So they want to say, what are the as-is processes? So I want to get the information about the KPIs, and that's the first step. On the other side, we see customers starting with documentation and process governance, so creating a structured repository and then doing process mining in a second step. So you see, the one thing is, what is your objective? And the other thing, what are the capabilities being provided by the ARIS platform? And of course, that should fit together. Yeah, and that should be done, would say, a little bit in an individual customer-specific way. Of course, there are templates and best practices, but I think you should bring the 2 things together. Same for business transformation and the same for regulatory compliance. I think the ARIS platform provides you with all the capabilities that you need, but you have to define the priorities for your organization. Last but not least, so I would like to end up with some provocative thesis regarding the evolution of enterprise management system. And I think the enterprise management system, as we see today, will not be the end of the story. So let me mention 3 things. So what I see is we are still at the beginning of automation, and everything that can be automated will be automated. So the same is true for analytics. So we are at the beginning of the analytical capabilities, still at the beginning. Everything that can be monitored will be monitored. And all the decisions, strategic and operational decisions, so will be based in the future on these data and will be based on simulation and will be based on what-if capabilities. So that means monitoring, automation, and analytics will play a much, much more prominent role. So as part of the overall enterprise management system, this is what I see at the moment. Yeah. As I said, provocative thesis, maybe some food for discussion, and I hope it was interesting for you. That's it from my side. So I'm looking forward to your feedback. What do you think about these trends and what do you think about these theses? And for now, I would like to thank you for your time and thank you for your attention. Thank you.